My name is Samantha, and I am 29 years old. I've spent my entire adult life measuring out flour, sugar, and patience, waiting for a family that never quite developed a taste for me. 2 years ago, that waiting ended. I stood in the private dining room of the Pristine Hills Country Club, my apron still tied around my waist because the club's chef had conveniently called in sick, and my mother insisted I step in. I had just cooked a 5-course meal for 20 people to celebrate my younger sister Destiny's lifestyle brand launch. And when the plates were cleared, I did something I had never done before. I asked for help. I needed $50,000. Just a loan. Just enough to keep my small catering business from going under after a client stiffed me on a massive wedding contract. My father, Robert, didn't even look up from his brandy. He just laughed. A short, sharp sound like a glass breaking. 50,000, he said, swirling the amber liquid. Samantha, you are unstable. We can't throw good money after bad. You need to learn to manage your little hobby better. And then, in the very next breath, he reached into his jacket pocket and slid a check across the white tablecloth to Destiny. The ink was still wet. I could read the numbers from where I stood. $300,000. For the brand launch, he said, beaming at her. To make sure you start on the right foot. Appearances are everything, sweetheart. Destiny squealed, clutching the check like a winning lottery ticket, not even glancing at me. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I didn't flip the table. I felt a cold, metallic clarity wash over me, settling deep in my bones. This wasn't about money. It never was. It was about value. To them, I was the help. Destiny was the product. I untied my apron, the one stained with the reduction sauce I'd spent 3 hours perfecting, and I let it drop. It landed right on my father's polished Italian loafers. He looked down, annoyed, but before he could speak, I turned and walked out. The drive to my cramped commercial kitchen was a blur of sodium lights and silence. The space smelled of yeast and exhaustion. I didn't pack clothes. I didn't pack memories. I packed my sourdough starter, a living, bubbling culture I'd kept alive for 7 years. It was the only thing in my life that grew when I fed it. I took my knives, my heavy cast-iron pans, and I left the rest. I pulled out my phone and opened the family group chat. The last message was a photo of Destiny holding the check, captioned, "Best Daddy Ever." I didn't reply. I hit leave conversation and then block. I drove 2 hours north, into the darkness, away from the city lights and the country clubs. I was heading toward a listing I'd seen online a month ago, a derelict barn and a dead orchard that cost exactly what I had in my savings account. I was buying a ruin because it was the only thing I could afford, and because, for the first time, I wanted something that was entirely, undeniably mine. When I arrived, it was pitch black. The headlights of my car illuminated a structure that looked more like a pile of kindling than a home. The roof was sagging. The orchard was a tangle of gray, skeletal branches. It looked hopeless. But as I stepped out of the car, the air smelled different here. It smelled like dirt and cold rain, not expensive perfume and judgment. I started clearing debris that very night. I dragged rotted planks out of the barn, my hands scraping against rough wood, my breath visible in the cold air. As I worked, the adrenaline began to fade, and the thoughts I'd been holding back came rushing in. Why did I stay so long? Why did I cook their dinners, plan their parties, and fix their mistakes for years? It is a concept called intermittent reinforcement. It is what keeps you at a slot machine. You lose and lose and lose, but every once in a while, you get a small win, a smile from your mother, a good job from your father, and that tiny, unpredictable crumb of affection keeps you pulling the lever. You think, maybe this time it will be different. Maybe if I bake the perfect cake, maybe if I am quiet enough, successful enough, helpful enough, they will finally see me. But they don't see you. They only see what you provide. I realized, standing there in the dark with a piece of rotted wood in my hand, that I had been starving at a banquet. I was the one cooking the feast, but I wasn't allowed to eat. And the hunger had kept me trapped. I threw the wood onto a pile and wiped my forehead, leaving a streak of dirt across my skin. I wasn't starving anymore. I was done waiting for crumbs. I looked at the dead trees and the broken barn, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see a mess. I saw dough. Rough, unformed, messy dough. And I knew exactly what to do with dough. You don't wait for it to rise on its own. You work it. You knead it. You put it in the fire. And that is exactly what I was going to do. Daylight is cruel to ruins. When the sun finally rose over my impulse purchase, I saw exactly what I had bought. The barn was listing to the left, like a ship taking on water. The orchard wasn't just dead. It was suffocated by invasive vines that looked like they had been tightening their grip for decades. There was no electricity. There was no running water in the main structure. It was a disaster. And it was perfect. I didn't have time to doubt myself. I had $50,000 of debt looming over me and a sourdough starter that needed to be fed. I set up a portable gas oven in the corner of the barn that wasn't leaking. I bought 50-pound bags of organic flour and dragged them in myself, my muscles burning, my knuckles scraping against the rough burlap. For the next 3 months, I didn't sleep more than 4 hours a night. I woke up at 3 in the morning, not to an alarm, but to the internal clock of the dough. It needed me. I mixed by hand because I couldn't afford an industrial mixer. I kneaded until my shoulders felt like they were on fire, until my hands were raw and coated in a permanent layer of flour and dust. This wasn't the pristine, air-conditioned plating I did for my parents' parties. This was war. It was me against the rot. I scrubbed floors that hadn't seen a mop in 50 years. I tore down drywall that was black with mold. I sweated through my clothes every single day. And every time I pulled a loaf of bread out of that tiny oven, golden, crackling, smelling like life itself, I felt a surge of power I had never felt in a country club. I was creating something real. That is when Caleb showed up. I was wrestling with a particularly stubborn vine near the road, covered in dirt, my hair a bird's nest, when an old truck pulled up. A man stepped out. He was about 31, wearing work boots that had actually seen work, and he was looking at my dead trees with an expression I couldn't place. It wasn't pity. It was curiosity. "You the one who bought the cursed orchard?" he asked, leaning against his truck. I stood up, wiping sweat from my eyes. "If you're here to tell me I'm crazy, take a number. The line starts behind my mother." He laughed. It was a warm, grounded sound. "I am Caleb. I am a landscape architect. I live a few miles down. And I am not here to call you crazy. I am here to tell you that those aren't just dead trees." He walked over to a gnarled, gray trunk and touched it gently, almost reverently. "These are heritage apple trees. Probably 80 years old. They aren't dead, they're just sleeping. They have been waiting for someone to wake them up. We made a deal right there in the tall grass. He would help me clear the land and save the trees, and I would pay him in bread and coffee until the business turned a profit. He saw potential where my family saw only rot. He saw the bones of the place. By the 4th month, we opened the barn doors. I didn't have a sign. I didn't have a marketing budget or a launch party. I just opened the doors and let the smell of fresh sourdough and cinnamon rolls drift down the road. And people came. Not because of a hashtag, but because they were hungry for something real. They lined up in the dirt driveway. Farmers, tourists, locals who remembered when this place used to be alive. I sold out every single day by noon. My hands were rough, my back ached constantly, and I had never felt more beautiful in my life. I wasn't polishing a mirror for my sister anymore. I was building a fire, and for the first time, I was the one keeping it warm. Destiny's brand launch didn't just fail, it evaporated. It turns out you cannot build a lifestyle empire on photos of empty coffee cups and bot followers. The internet is cruel, but it is also smart. People smelled the fake a mile away. And when the pre-orders were canceled and the comments turned nasty, my parents didn't come for her. They panicked. See, in a family like ours, children aren't people. We are mirrors. Destiny was the golden mirror, polished to reflect my parents' success back at them. If she looked good, they looked good. If she failed, the crack ran right through their ego. They needed a fix. They needed authenticity. And suddenly, they remembered they had a daughter who actually knew how to work. It was a Tuesday morning when my father's black luxury sedan crunched up the dirt driveway. He stepped out, looking at my blooming orchard like he was stepping into a crime scene. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my tractor. He didn't knock on the barn door. He just walked in, wrinkling his nose at the flour dust in the air. "So," he said, gesturing vaguely at the beams I had sanded by hand. "This is where you have been hiding." "It is a hovel, Samantha. A literal hovel." I didn't stop kneading the dough. "Hello, Robert. It is called a bakery. And we are closed to the public until 10.
He ignored me.
Narcissists don't hear boundaries. They hear challenges. "Destiny is rebranding," he announced, as if he were bestowing a favor. "We are doing a return to roots theme. Rustic. Authentic. We need you to cater the relaunch party here. It will be good exposure for your little project." He wasn't asking. He was ordering. He expected me to be grateful for the chance to serve them again. He expected me to jump back into my box. I wiped my hands on a towel and leaned against the counter.
"No," I said.
He blinked. "Excuse me?"
"No."
"I won't cater the party. And you can't have it here." His face turned a dangerous shade of red. "You are being selfish. After everything we have done for you? We invested $300,000 in your sister's future, and now that she needs help, you turn your back? You have always been the difficult one. The black sheep." And right there, in the silence of my barn, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. There is a sociological concept called the scapegoat mechanism. It explains that toxic families are like a pressurized system. To function, they need a place to dump their collective anxiety, their shame, and their failures. They pick one person to carry it all so the others can remain perfect. I wasn't the black sheep because I was bad. I was the black sheep because they needed someone to be bad, so Destiny could be good. By leaving, I hadn't just quit a job, I had broken their machine. Without me there to absorb the negativity, the pressure had nowhere to go. It was turning inward. Destiny was failing because she had no one to be better than. My parents were spiraling because they had no one to blame. "I am not difficult, Robert," I said, my voice steady. "I am just unavailable." I reached into a drawer and pulled out an envelope I had prepared months ago, just in case. I slid it across the counter. "What is this?" he snapped. "That is a bill," I said. "For 10 years of catering, event planning, and crisis management. $50,000. If you want my services for the relaunch, you can pay the balance first. Plus interest." He stared at the paper, then at me, his eyes wide with shock. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that the currency had changed. His approval was no longer legal tender here. "You are insane," he hissed. "You are trying to destroy this family." "The family destroyed itself," I said. "I just stopped sweeping up the wreckage. Now get off my land." He stood there for a long moment, vibrating with rage, realizing he had no leverage. No money to dangle. No guilt to weaponize. He turned on his heel and stormed out, spinning his tires in the dirt as he fled back to his glass house. I watched him go, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt like the land itself, solid, rooted, and impossible to move. My bakery, which I named the Heirloom, didn't just grow. It exploded. It turns out that in a world of filters and artificial flavors, people are starving for something that has actual roots. The line of cars stretched down the dirt road every morning. I had to hire 3 local teenagers just to manage the counter while Caleb and I worked 18-hour days trying to keep up with the demand. We needed more space. The old barn floor was groaning under the weight of the new commercial ovens, and the parking situation was a disaster. On a humid Wednesday afternoon, Caleb was prying up the rotted floorboards in the back storage room to reinforce the foundation. I was kneading dough in the front, the rhythm of it soothing my nerves, when the sound of screeching metal stopped me cold. "Samantha," Caleb called out. His voice sounded strange.
"Tight.
"You need to see this." I wiped my hands on my apron and walked back. Caleb was kneeling in the dirt beneath the floor joists, holding a rusted metal lockbox. It looked like it had been buried there for decades. He handed it to me, and the weight of it felt heavy, significant. I carried it to the prep table and grabbed a screwdriver to pry the lock. Inside, Wrapped in oilcloth to protect against the damp was a leather-bound journal and a stack of legal documents. The handwriting on the first page of the journal made my breath hitch. It was jagged, elegant, and unmistakably my grandmother's. She had passed away 5 years ago, the only person in my family who had ever looked at me without disappointment. I started reading, and the world tilted on its axis. The orchard wasn't a random ruin I had stumbled upon. My grandmother had bought this land 20 years ago. She had planted the trees, rare ghost apples, a nearly extinct variety that glows white translucent when ripe. She had bought it specifically for me. I unfolded the legal documents. There was a deed transferring the property to a trust in my name, dated 2 months before she died. And then underneath it, a transfer of sale. My father, Robert, acting as the executor of her estate, had sold the land to a holding company for pennies on the dollar. He had buried the trust, hidden the will, and sold the land to a shell corporation he controlled. When I bought this place, I hadn't just bought a ruin. I had bought my own inheritance. My father had stolen it from me, let it rot because he didn't care about apples or legacies, and then sold it back to me when he needed cash. I felt a wave of nausea, so strong, I had to grip the edge of the table. It wasn't just greed. It was erasure. He had looked me in the eye for years, knowing he had robbed me of the one thing my grandmother wanted me to have, and he had slept soundly at night. He didn't just think I was a failure, he had actively engineered my struggle. Caleb read the papers over my shoulder, his hand resting protectively on my back. "He sold you your own land," he whispered, his voice thick with disbelief. "He made you pay $50,000 for a gift that was already yours." I closed the journal. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard fury. "He didn't just steal the land, Caleb," I said, looking out the window at the blooming white trees. "He tried to steal the memory of her love for me. He wanted me to believe I had nothing." I picked up the deed. He forgot one thing, though. Ghost apples don't stay dead. They come back. 2 days later, the inevitable collapse of the Bennett family arrived. Destiny's Return to Roots launch party was a catastrophe of biblical proportions. The discount caterer Robert hired, because he refused to pay my rates, served undercooked shellfish. Half the guests, including 3 major investors and a local food critic, went home with food poisoning. The live stream, meant to save her brand, instead captured Destiny screaming at a waiter while a guest vomited in the background. They were ruined. Robert had gambled the last of his liquidity on that launch. They were facing lawsuits, public humiliation, and financial insolvency. And like drowning rats looking for high ground, they remembered the one thing they hadn't destroyed yet. They arrived at the Heirloom at noon on a Sunday. The bakery was packed. The smell of cinnamon and roasted apples filled the air. I saw Robert's car swerve into the expanded lot, followed by Destiny's convertible. They stormed past the line of customers, pushing people aside. Robert looked manic, his suit rumpled, his eyes wild. Destiny looked like a ghost, her makeup smeared, trembling with rage. "You!" Robert shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me across the counter. The chatter in the bakery died instantly. "You did this. You sabotaged us." I didn't flinch. I continued boxing a dozen pastries for Mrs. Higgins, a regular. "That will be $20, please," I said calmly. "Don't ignore me." Robert slammed his hand on the glass display case. "We know you're making money here. This land, it's family property. We need to liquidate. We're taking it back." Destiny stepped up, her voice shrill. "You stole this from us, Samantha. You knew this place was valuable. You tricked Dad into selling it cheap." The audacity was breathtaking. They were rewriting history in real time, trying to turn their theft into my crime. Caleb stepped out from the kitchen, crossing his arms, a silent wall of muscle behind me. But I didn't need him to fight this. "I didn't trick anyone," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "And this isn't family property. It is mine." "It was your grandmother's," Robert yelled, thinking he had trapped me. "She meant for it to be a family asset. You have no right to hoard it while your sister loses everything." I reached under the counter and pulled out the metal box. I placed it on the glass case with a heavy thud. Then I laid the journal and the original deed on top of it. "You are right, Robert," I said. "It was Grandma's. And she left it to me. Specifically me." Robert's face went gray. He recognized the journal. "I know about the trust," I said, opening the deed to the page with his signature. "I know you forged the transfer documents. I know you sold it to a shell company to hide the asset, and then sold it to me when you thought the land was worthless." I leaned forward. "You committed estate fraud. You stole from your own mother, and you stole from me. And these trees? These aren't just old apple trees. They're ghost apples, the rarest variety in the state.
I have already had them appraised.
This orchard is worth more than your house, your car, and Destiny's fake brand combined." Destiny looked at her father, horror dawning on her face. "Dad? Is that true?" Robert opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was shrinking, deflating right in front of us. The narcissist's greatest fear is exposure, and I had just stripped him naked in front of a room full of strangers. "I have a lawyer drafting the paperwork now," I said, my voice ice cold. "If you ever step foot on this property again, or if you ever try to contact me, I will hand this entire box over to the district attorney. You won't just be bankrupt, Robert. You will be in prison." I pointed to the door. "Get out. And take your failure with you."
He didn't argue.
He didn't threaten. He grabbed Destiny's arm and fled, the bell above the door jingling cheerfully as they ran. The bakery was silent for a heartbeat, and then Mrs. Higgins started clapping. We watched them drive away, through the dust. I looked at Caleb, then at the customers who were smiling at me with awe. I looked down at my flower-covered hands. They hadn't broken me. They had just cleared the ground for me to grow. The dust from their departure settled slowly, coating the gravel in a fine gray film. Inside the bakery, the silence was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind of silence that comes after a fever breaks. Mrs. Higgins was the first to move. She walked up to the counter, placed a $20 bill in the tip jar, and said, "Honey, that was better than any soap opera I've ever seen. Now, can I get a cinnamon roll?" Laughter rippled through the room. It was tentative at first, then loud and raucous. The tension snapped. Caleb squeezed my shoulder, his grip solid and warm, and just like that, we went back to work. We baked.
We served. We lived.
My lawyer sent the letter the next morning. It was brief and brutal. It outlined the fraud, the theft of the estate, and the witness testimonies we had lined up. It ended with a simple promise. If they ever contacted me or set foot on the orchard again, I would press charges. They signed the release forms 3 days later. They didn't fight. They couldn't. I heard through the grapevine that Robert had to sell the house in Pristine Hills to cover his debts. Destiny deleted her social media accounts after the food poisoning incident went viral in the worst way possible. They retreated into the shadows, shrinking back into the small, bitter lives they had tried so hard to gild with gold paint. 6 months later, the ghost apples finally ripened. It happens all at once. One morning, the orchard was green, and the next, thousands of pale, translucent orbs were glowing in the branches like hanging lanterns. It was breathtaking. I walked through the rows with Caleb, our boots crunching on the fallen leaves. We picked one, slicing it open right there. The flesh was white as snow, sweet and crisp. We made a tart with them that sold out in 20 minutes. As we sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun dip below the treeline, I thought about the difference between my life and the one I had left behind. There is a profound truth I learned in the heat of the kitchen. You cannot fake the rising. You can put a filter on a photo of a cake, but you cannot fake the taste. You can buy followers, but you cannot buy the loyalty of a community that shows up every morning because you feed them something real. My family spent their lives building stages, performing success for an audience that didn't care. They were exhausted actors in a play nobody was watching. But here, in the dirt and the flour, this is real. The ache in my back is real. The money in the bank is real. The man holding my hand is real. Performance is fragile. It shatters the moment the spotlight moves. But authenticity? Authenticity is like sourdough. It is messy, it is wild, and it endures. It feeds you even when the lights go out. I took a bite of warm bread, slathered in butter from the dairy farm down the road. It tasted like victory. It tasted like peace. My grandmother knew what she was doing when she bought this land. She didn't just leave me an orchard. She left me a fortress. She knew that the only way to keep me safe from a family that wanted to consume me was to give me the means to feed myself. I looked at the metal box sitting on the mantel inside, the deed safe and sound. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their money. I had built a table they couldn't sit at, and the feast was just beginning. The best revenge isn't burning their house down. It's building your own so strong they can't blow it over. If you've ever had to build your own table because they wouldn't give you a seat, share the story.